Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome back to our humble podcast. I'm Phil Adams.
I'm Jay Britton.
I'm Andrew McCready's.
Prices for marijuana seem to be collapsing. Andrew's got some information on that and what growers are doing about it. Former Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher is predicting that legalization is coming soon. And also in the political world, Joe Biden's cannabis policy could turn out to be a gift in the end to Donald Trump. There's a new study out about THC and the risk of traffic accidents. Andrew's got an interesting story about how the 1%ers are getting high. You'll want to stick around for that one. State Senator from Alabama is giving advice to cancer patients about where to get their weed. But first, I want to start with a story out of the great state, or formerly great state, depending on your perspective, of Illinois, which just became the 11th, unofficially, state to join the National Legalized Marijuana for Recreational Use Club. Let's hear it for Illinois. In doing so, I would say, and this is an article out of Forbes magazine that is giving us this news, I would say that by comparison, Illinois seems to be making New York and New Jersey its bitch, wouldn't you say?
Yep, absolutely.
It kind of making them look bad.
They look like dorks after they talked about legalizing in the first 100 days. We're going to do this really quick. It's our priority.
Right.
Wah, wah, wah.
Bullshit. So both the eastern states have been fighting this, and they look, like Andrew says, like a bunch of assholes. But for whatever reason, lawmakers in that part of the country, in the East Coast, seem to be a little confused about, how to set up their regulatory regimen, taxing. There's a lot of issues involved, and they just kind of said, whoa, we're not going to do it. Mm-hmm. And Illinois said, step aside, motherfucker. We got this. So good for Illinois.
Ayo. And also, the regulations they pass are pretty realistic and reasonable.
Well,
kudos to Illinois.
And Illinois. and the article says it turns out that marijuana legalization might not be so challenging to do legislatively after all. Not only does this move give adults 21 and older the freedom to purchase marijuana through retail outlets, a.k.a. dispensaries, but it also is the first of its kind in the history of this decades-long movement to include provisions designed to correct problems stemming from the misguided principles of prohibition. So a lot of this old reefer madness nonsense is getting kind of shaken out by this apparently simple but effective legislation. So good for you, Illinois. There's hope for you.
They're
yet.
also going to expunge a lot of criminal records of people who were arrested for possession or minor cannabis charges.
This is what does my heart good, because it means that so many of the people over the years who have gotten caught up in this prohibition nonsense and have had their records and in many cases lives ruined by something as ridiculous as this are getting some relief. So that's good news as well. So way to go, Illinois.
You said how it turns out doing this legislation is not as difficult as some people might say. And I think where the problem lies is not in setting up fair and reasonable regulations. The problem lies is setting up shitty regulations. These legislators who don't want it, so therefore they set up really bad legislation. That's where all the problems are, and it's harder to do to make it to make regulations that suck than
the kind of poison pills. Yeah.
Well, you especially see that when you have the ballot initiatives passed, and the legislators didn't want that law, and then they have the opportunity to fuck up the law in the way they write the regulations. Happens all the time.
Like just now in Arizona, Arizona's had medical for years. Now they're finally saying, "Oh, okay, well, extracts are okay."
Yeah, right.
And in Florida, they finally said, "Oh, flowers are okay." I mean, talking about being on different pages.
And they're all coming to the same conclusions eventually.
Yeah. Right.
It's just what all the crap that happens in the meantime.
Well, like Winston Churchill said, America always does the right thing after they exhausted every other option.
Yep. Well, folks in Illinois, we'd love to hear from you. In fact, folks from around the country and anywhere else in the world. If we're lucky enough to have you as a listener, we would love to hear your feedback on this or on any other topic you want. Please check us out at VoteProPot.com.
Or send us an email at podcast@VoteProPot.com or call our message line 240-257-2441, and we'll put you on the show.
And please like, follow, and share us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Just do a search for Vote Pro Pot.
So, Jay, what's going on with legalization predictions? An ex-congressman has some ideas about that.
Right. Ex-Representative Rohrabacher from South Carolina was on TMZ Live the other night. And he made a comment essentially saying that he believes federal marijuana legalization is just around the corner. He believes that President Trump is going to make something happen by 2022. The longtime Republican congressman from South Carolina was on TMZ Live Wednesday to talk cannabis because Rohrabacher, who's now invested in the weed industry, what? There we go again. Says his former
funny how that works.
Yeah, funny how that works. It says his former cohorts on Capitol Hill are already working on legislation to allow all Americans toke legally. All right, we'll see.
And to make and only to allow a few corporations.
Yeah.
His being one of them,
Yes.
naturally.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
So we've got a little clip here. Let me play a clip.
Will the federal government legalize some form of either medical cannabis or cannabis in general, as we've seen our neighbors to the north, Canada, do?
I am predicting that they will, and the Congress will do it in coordination with this president, who will help shape the compromises necessary to push the bill through Congress.
Well, I wonder if Dana Rohrabacher is working with the same corporate group as John Boehner. Maybe
it's
they know something that we don't. And Boehner seems to believe that that Trump will sign such legislation into law.
The ex-congressman became a marijuana champion during his tenure in D.C. and recently became a board member for BudTrader.com. How coincidental is that?
I never heard of BudTrader.
I haven't either. It's an online cannabis distribution platform. So there are several stories, and I'll be doing another one today in this show about this happening fairly quickly by 2022. And we have a story coming up, as you mentioned in the intro, Phil, about Biden, and maybe he is screwed because of his past with regard to legalizing cannabis.
Do you think that legalizing cannabis is going to be an issue in the 2020 elections? I believe that we're going to see a lot of Republicans are going to come out in favor of reform and thinking it's going to do two things. One, it might bring some votes their way, but it also sort of negate their opponent's position. So
yeah, I think you're right.
It's going to take cannabis sort of off. They're going to try to take cannabis off the table. And what we need to do is go, whoa, it's more complicated than that. You say you're going to legalize. How are you going to legalize? Can you smoke flower? Can you smoke oil?
Right. Can you sell edibles?
They're going to look at the states' rights issue, if nothing else. I mean, I think that's the kind of fallback for the Republicans is, this is a states' rights issue, and the federal government should stay out of it.
But we always hear that. We heard that the last election.
Yes, we do.
And they come in and say, well, we're going to crack down. It's illegal federally. We're going to crack down. And now they're going, oh, we're so cool. What we're going to do is we're not going to allow federal police to invade states where people are legally licensed by the state, which is where we were during the Obama administration. So really, we haven't gone anywhere in the last 3 years, 2.5 years.
Well, but we have because...
Well, politically, probably not, no.
Not politically.
Legislatively, yes.
Yeah.
But as more and more states become legal, that's less and less states that the feds are going to move in.
The federal policy.
Yeah, but the federal policy is affected by the states which are legal. In other words, you're saying, Andrew, the feds aren't going to move in if it's a legal state. And the more legal states we get, the less states the feds are going to move in and take any kind of action.
Obviously, the toothpaste is out of the tube. I mean, they're not going to put it back in. But I'm just saying after Jeff Sessions came back and sort of, pulled it back and then just put it back to where it was. So really, we haven't gone anywhere.
Right. But as an issue, though, I would say politically, at the very least, we're to a point where being staunchly anti-cannabis is not going to be seen as a winner, necessarily. Whether you're going to be foursquare behind legalization or just not use it as an issue, I think it's too much of a calculus to really figure out where your political fortunes are going to lie. They're just, if you're for it, actually sincerely for it, then you're going to say so. If you're actually not sincerely for it, then maybe not. That's just how I read the tea leaves here.
Now, we've seen in Oregon how the price of cannabis is dropping. Last I read, Phil and I were talking about it before the show, about how in Oregon you can get an eighth for how much? $8?
Yeah.
Something insanely cheap. So what's happening is all these growers who went through the application process and getting licensed to be growers, they invest a lot of money in it. And now the price, when they calculated their business plan, cannabis was going for a couple $1,000s a pound, and now it's not. So all these growers are sort of scrambling to cut costs. And the number one way a lot of these growers are doing it is by cutting back on the electrical use. More and more growers are going to start turning to greenhouses. They're trying to cut back on by using LEDs or whatever they can to lower their electrical costs, because apparently it's phenomenal. It's one of their highest costs.
That's what's killing them
for these indoor grows.
Well, I imagine because you not only have to regulate the temperature but the humidity. To a pretty fine
That's
degree.
True. What you have to do, you have to have a heater and an air conditioner, a humidifier and a dehumidifier, all four operating at one time to maintain that perfect temperature and humidity. And all the while, you need a constant breeze with fans to circulate the air. So what are they going to do? Electricity. Pardon?
What are they going to do, Andrew? What are they going to do?
The number one is going to be greenhouses. You could use natural sun; it's free, and also. Natural sun, I've read many places that natural sun really does grow a better quality product,
look at...
It's a natural product, makes sense.
Yeah, look at tomatoes and cucumbers and other... the hothouse tomatoes, they're never the same.
Well, that's another thing we were talking about before the show. Maybe one of the options for these growers is, go back full circle and start growing high-quality food for high-end restaurants. Maybe it could be an option to get through lean times, but... it's going to be tough. You're going to see, the money the gold mine that everyone thought being growers was going to be. I think is may not pan out for a lot of people.
Yeah, but you were talking about Oregon, Andrew. Isn't a lot of that the way Oregon set up their permitting process? There's just too many people growing it.
That's true. That's
too many growers.
But when we have legally nationwide and everybody's growing, you're going to see the price.
Right.
That naturally is just going to go down. And now,
that's true.
And now what you're seeing. Now some of these companies, especially dispensaries, are starting to battle it out by offering really
huge
discounts, and in some cases lost leaders. To get you into the store.
Competition.
So that further is going to upset a lot of the people in the industry.
Well, based on what you said earlier, the electricity and all the what's involved with growing it, there's no fucking way they can make money at $8. There's no way.
No.
Or 10 or 20.
No,
it's just...
and this is what, when we interviewed Cody Sanchez, she is the cannabis investment analyst, she said, I was asking her, what areas, what verticals are you most interested in? She said, well, one thing I'm not really interested in, we're not pushing, is the growers.
Right.
And I think for that reason, because, if you're not vertically integrated and you don't have ways to make up that further down the supply chain,
you're hosed.
It just doesn't seem like a profitable
it's
venture.
like any farmer in the United States. You got to love it, man, because it is a risky business.
Yeah. Well, what do
hard work.
Farmers do when they have too much of a crop? What they allow them to do, they process it. So a lot of these growers need to start processing. I know in olden times, when you grew your grain, what you couldn't get to the market, you made mash out of, and then you distilled it and made whiskey, which you could sell all year long.
Right.
So that's what I think some of these growers are. If you're a grower, you got to survive. You got to get into processing.
That makes sense.
Right. They got to make marijuana whiskey. So
Well, they are. I think there is an infused gin in Europe. There's some infused wines I've seen and beer. I think what would be great would be an infused absinthe. Imagine that.
My mouth is watering.
As it boils down to, a grower will use 10 times the energy per square foot that an office building will use.
Wow.
No kidding.
Wow.
So that's where you're going to see. So I think the big trend is going to be a lot. It's going to go from indoors back to greenhouses because they couldn't be outdoors because it was illegal for so long. It drove it literally underground indoors.
Gotcha.
Yep. So that's what.
That makes sense.
And also, I think you're going to see a return to legally grown cannabis, high-end quality cannabis outdoors. In the Emerald Triangle and Humboldt County, places like that, you'll see some outdoor grown stuff, and that is going to be interesting because that's going to be really geographically defined,
like wine.
Like wine.
So, Jay, what's up with the political campaigns here with regard to cannabis?
There's an op-ed piece in Forbes by Chris Crane that's pretty interesting. Essentially, he set forth his feeling that Joe Biden's cannabis policy is going to be a gift to Donald Trump in the general election should Biden get the nomination, which I'm suspect. I kind of don't see that happening. But he's way ahead in the polls. And there's a myriad of reasons why, but the most obvious reason is his past. He has, from a legalization standpoint and for a drug policy standpoint from that regard, he has a terrible past. I mean, things he said, things he's done, which, I mean, he's not alone in that. I mean, let's face it, a lot of politicians, even left-wing politicians like Obama, they were very anti-marijuana or so forth, at some time. So that's fine. People change their minds, and certainly politicians do, that's for sure. But essentially what he says here is that he's kind of changing now where I'm quoting here, he supports decriminalization of marijuana and automatically expunging prior criminal records for marijuana possession. That's his stance now. I think the problem really is within that quote, that's a quote from Biden, he also says that he would like to reschedule it to a Schedule 2. And I don't think that's really what most of us are looking for. We want it off this. We don't want Schedule 2.
We want descheduling.
Descheduling completely. So the problem is, according to what Chris Crane here in Forbes says, President Trump is said to support a marijuana policy in advance of the 2020 election. Those are the predictions being made by people inside politics around the Trump administration that supposedly in meetings and so forth, when this subject comes up, he's fairly positive about it. He's not going to go out front. Like you were saying earlier in the show, Phil, he's not going to step out front and say, this is what I want to do. This is one of my policies. But at the same time, he's not going to turn his back to advocacy either. During drug war hysteria of the 80s, Biden introduced a slew of draconian drug policy bills that called for federal government to, among other things, aggressively use criminal, civil, and other equitable remedies against drug offenders. So he even went so far as to push for a death penalty for marijuana dealers who sponsored rave. Remember the big rave thing back in the 80s?
Sure.
He actually supposedly sponsored a bill that would make it a death penalty to sell weed at a rave. So the problem is folks on the left, who obviously are on our side of the fence in terms of advocacy and in terms of legalization, they're not going to go for this. I mean, and let's face it, if Trump's running for president, well, he will be. If he's running against Biden, I should say, this shit's going to get thrown back in Biden's face. And there's a list of quotes.
Well, yeah.
There's a list of, among other things,
Right. And Biden's problem is this. His big calling card is, number one, his experience. He's been, doing this a long time. He's the most experienced. And two, he's decisive, or seen as decisive. Except he's flipped on abortion. He's flipped on a number of things. Now he's flipping on cannabis. So that decisiveness is kind of out the window. He's kind of following the trends. And not only that, but his past is full of these landmines. So that kind of negates the experience. His experience is not a plus. His experience is a net minus. So what's left for him?
Well, actually, come on.
Name recognition.
So many years on Capitol Hill is any experience is good experience. You can't say that.
Well, I think in fairness, though, you can say that about flipping, but Trump is in the same position. I mean, he's flipped on everything. He used to be a liberal Democrat, for crying out loud. So, I'm not sure that is really an argument where Biden wins. I mean, Trump wins over Biden. They both have that issue.
I think one of the things that what Biden said was he wants to expunge records and decriminalize, and that's problematic, and just by definition. I mean, because if you decriminalize, people are still going to be getting arrested. But decriminalize just makes small amounts possession a finable offense.
Right.
So, I mean, that doesn't go anywhere. There's no progress there.
Right. It's a half measure. He should either be on board or not on board.
The thing about the cannabis issues, every politician is evolving on it. They have to. The only way we're going to win is if they evolve on it.
Yeah, that's very much true. Look at these Republicans.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that, Andrew. But the problem is, as recently as 2012, he's made statements that he still believes that marijuana is a gateway drug.
2012 was come on, guys. It's going to be almost 7, 8 years ago now.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying. I do the point of the article, and I'm going to close out with this. This is a quote from the writer. Should the party choose to nominate a drug war dinosaur like Joe Biden, they may not only lose the opportunity to gain the political spoils of an increasingly popular issue, they may be handing control of the White House back to Donald Trump for another 4 years. So this is one man's opinion. Let's be honest, but it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting point of discussion.
Yeah, yesterday, Obama's campaign manager or chief campaign consultant, a guy named David Axelrod, kind of essentially said the same thing about Biden, that there's so many things in his past that he is now kind of jettisoned, that it's
look, times change.
It kind of negates a lot of his advantages.
I think
so, and I think this may be one area.
I don't think evolving on an issue negates you.
No, but when you evolve on every issue, I think it can be an issue.
He has evolved on every issue. Obviously, no one does that.
But you're going to have a hard time finding a politician that's been around for 50 freaking years or whatever that hasn't evolved. They all have. They all do, and because things change, and they're politicians. They're out for votes. Yeah. So they're going to swing
you can't take the politics out of politics.
No, they're going to swing with the wind. They're going to figure out what's going to get them elected. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. That's how it works.
Now, we have a lot of discussions regarding the politics and the legislative process and advocacy of cannabis. And being the kind of resident conservative Republican on the panel here, my role, as I see it, has always been to try to speak to those people on the right side of the aisle, because let's face it, they seem to be the ones who are in the most need of convincing, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
Well, there is an organization that we have encountered called RAMP, Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. And this is a very interesting and important organization, and we have a discussion coming up. You'll want to check us out with the communications director for RAMP. And so keep your eyes peeled for that.
So the upper 1%ers like their weed as well, and as it turns out, but they don't go about getting their weed the same as the rest of us. What is happening now in legal states, you see we're having what they call, I think, for lack of a better term, a cannabis concierge. And that's where they will go to the VIP's house with a selection, let them sample, let them look at it, let them ask all the questions they want, and make their purchases there in person. And so that's sort of a trend that's happening now. And also, they have no problem spending $800 for an ounce. Sure, if it's like, so they're buying high-end premium. And the other thing they're doing is, and this is also affecting the industry, and that is they have no problem spending $2,000 on a bong.
Whoa.
Right.
What kind of bong can you get for
Well,
$2,000?
a custom art blown glass piece that looks like a
Gotcha,
dragon
yeah.
or something, something like that.
Yeah, right,
These
right,
pieces
right.
that probably could go for a lot more than $2,000. I'm sure you can find some.
Jeez.
Or
Yeah.
last year,
Handcrafted,
last year they
yeah.
had a charity auction in Nevada, and that guy bought a blunt, like a cigar joint, for $11,000. An anonymous buyer bought it through his lawyer. And so,
What if your stoner buddy knocks your bong off the table and
right.
smashes it all over the floor?
What I think this is going to cement in is definitely there's going to be a high-end market in the cannabis industry when it comes to your flowers and edibles and and oils and things, as well as paraphernalia. And what else? People are going to start buying like,
Everything else, right?
Electronic humidors. They're going to be fine.
Sure. All the accessories, yeah.
Right. I mean, we see that with cigar aficionados. It can only be that and more with cannabis aficionados.
True. Or
right?
wine, or, yeah.
So,
you can
would
spend
you guys,
$1,000.
if you had the money, would you spend a lot of money on paraphernalia or flour, or where would you spend your money in the cannabis industry, or where do you think other people will?
I don't think I'd spend that kind of money on it.
No.
It's
I can't tell the difference, to be honest. I mean, yeah, you can tell. Something that tastes really good is really nice, but not 3-4 times as much. And
yeah, I mean, is a $300 bottle of wine any really that much better than a $100 bottle?
Sometimes,
Not
definitely.
for someone like
no, yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
Not to
if
me,
you know your wines, it
yeah.
is, but not to me.
Well,
I'm
so
just
the
a
same thing's going to
scrub.
hold true for cannabis.
really,
Yeah.
So what kind of weed would be, $800-900 an ounce?
Oh,
Andrew?
it's some landrace original strain from
Right.
Afghanistan that has a great profile and great flavor and is grown perfectly. And you're given
Right, I
just the
see.
choice colas. I mean, that's
Right.
the kind of stuff. See, that's
Aged
something we've
perfectly.
talked about before, and I think maybe the National Cannabis Industry Association would be the people to do this with. And that is, I think they should start grading cannabis the same way they grade beef in the food industry, where you have the high end is prime, your prime cuts that 99% of it is exclusively sold to chefs for high end restaurants. Right. Then you have your choice, which has a little less marble, not quite as good, but still very extremely
Right.
high end quality. That's what we see at supermarkets. And then you have your standards and your sirloins, and so with cannabis you'll have your choice buds, just the prime, super high end quality as prime. Then you have your choice, which are really great buds too, fun. And then you have your standards, which would just be sort of smaller buds, just whatever. But then the next level would be your popcorn buds and sugar leaves, which will be sold but not to customers in raw form. That'll be used to roll pre-rolls and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
For
Gotcha.
joints. And then below that, they have something what they call cutter and scrap in meats, which is the stuff that's used, goes straight for processing. That's the beef that's in.
Yeah, it ends up being spam and scrapple.
And it's in ravioli, ravioli
Yeah.
and
Chef Boyardee.
that kind of stuff.
Perfectly good meat is just not prime.
Right. You'll never
primo,
see that sold in retail. And that's what they need to do in the cannabis industry. And they need to go, okay, this is a choice bud. This is a prime bud. This is your standard bud.
I think that's a great idea.
Now, let me get your guys' opinions on this, because this is, again, something I go back to Cody Sanchez talking about premiumization. And this might be, I think, kind of a lesson to our friends on the far left about how the economy works with the one percenters. And what it is when you have these kinds of folks willing to put this kind of money into this premium of a product, it filters all the way down, and they like to degrade it by calling it trickle down, but it kind of infuses the whole economic chain with funds that eventually make for a strong industry. And a strong industry is what provides jobs and, keeps everybody going. I think this is a terrific development. I love hearing about this. What do you guys think?
I mean, 1%, but the 1%ers are really going to represent only 1% of the sales. So can 1%, even though they're spending $800 for an ounce or $2,000 for a bong, how is that going to affect the great overwhelming majority of the industry? It's because most people aren't spending that much. So, how is that really going to infuse? For some businesses it will, but the average grower or something just doing, who don't have high-end product, or customers, how's it going to affect them?
Well, I mean, it's the difference in profit margin, It's not going to, it may be 1% of the sales, but it's going to be a lot more than 1% of the revenue.
Right, I was going to say that.
Because it's a lot of dough. And the profit margin, if you increase a corporation's profit margin from 5% to 6%, that's a big damn deal. That helps a lot of people.
I know in the liquor industry, the people come in and spend $200 for a bottle of wine, or the people spend $20 a bottle of wine. This $200 bottle of wine, I don't see how that really helps the industry. It may help me because I make a little on that one sale, but I don't see how. I can see the high end helping the industry to a certain degree, but I don't think it's going to have a huge effect, for a lot of businesses.
Well, that's what I wanted to get your opinion on, whether you think this is going to make a big difference on. I kind of think that it could. So,
well, I think a lot of these 1%ers are older too, so they're boomers. So they're prime in the market.
Right.
They're the target market.
They've kind of made their money, and
also as
their
far
kids
as
are all
these
gone.
boomers concerned, I really think that you're going to start seeing more like throwback marketing and throwback products. You might see like Acapulco Gold or Panama Red or come back. Or like the old
70s.
U.S.
Smoking it in a Leave It to Beaver bong.
Or even better, the most classic. I know no one. You really didn't go to college unless you had a bong made out of a honey bottle. Those little honey bears.
Right. Yeah.
Little
honey bears.
God, who didn't have one of those?
You're showing your age, bro.
Jay, do you have the story about the new study on THC?
This is out of maryjane.com by Chris Moore. Researchers from the University of British Columbia conducted a study to determine whether these fears are grounded in reality and discovered that THC does not increase the risk of traffic accidents. I think that's pretty interesting. Researchers examined police reports from thousands of traffic accidents that occurred in British Columbia between 2010 and 2016. In each of these collisions, blood samples showing concentrations of THC, alcohol, and other impairing drugs or medications were taken from the drivers. Researchers compared these drug concentrations with the police reports, which, quote, were analyzed to determine which drivers were responsible for the crash and which were incidentally involved or not responsible. And what they found was that there was no increase in crash risk after adjustment for age, sex, and the use of other impairing substances in drivers with THC of 5 nanograms or less. So essentially what they found was a lot, like, let's say there was an accident and they tested this person and they had THC in their system. Well, they may have also had a, 0.8 alcohol level, or they may have been taking some other drug. But when they wipe all that out and look at people who are just high, essentially, or just had THC in their system, they were not the cause of the accident.
And that is in addition to, just because you test positive for THC doesn't mean you're under the influence of it.
Exactly. Yeah, and we've talked about that many times. That's right.
So that brings it down. Really, that's going to bring it down anymore. One thing that the study I did see was people who have experience smoking cannabis. If they smoke a little bit, that doesn't really affect their driving at all.
Right.
But it's the people who never have smoked it and smoked too much. Those people should not be behind the wheel.
Right. Or eat 100 milligram edible or something and get behind the wheel and it kicks in an hour later and go, fuck.
Right. But this is the answer to a lot of the criticism where people look at the numbers in, for example, Colorado, where, people say, well, look at the number of accidents have gone up since then. Well, there's more to it than just raw numbers.
It's something, a new statistic they just started. So.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So anyway, that's something to let everybody know about. Those of you who are always trying to make an argument on the pro side.
Well, I think the deal is people shouldn't be smoking cannabis recreationally and getting wasted and driving the car.
No, absolutely
But if you're on, especially a low THC medication, and you're not really, you might feel a little mellow, but you're not buzzed. Well, those people probably should be able to can drive. With the study saying those people can drive with no problem. Okay, as it turns out, a lot of people are making mistakes when they're storing their weed. Now, apparently, cannabis enthusiasts will know that when bud dries out, it loses its terpenes and its flavor, and it just isn't. It's not, the quality just greatly decreases if you allow it to dry out and you don't store it properly. So here's some of the mistakes people are making when it comes to storing their weed. Number one, they use a Ziploc bag. That is not good because it's not airtight. And you'll notice on a baggie sometimes that they'll get like a dust on the inside. Well, that's all the trichomes. That's all the good stuff. So that's, that's not good. And the other thing, and the second mistake is that they'll often take your Ziploc bag and fold it in half and stick it in your pocket, which just crumples it. And it's not good. The other thing is, like, you got to understand where you keep it should be size proportionate. So you don't want to get like a half-gallon glass jar and put a gram of weed in it because it's all that oxygen in there. It's what's going to dry it out and lose the flavor.
Right.
So you try to get it the smallest container possible, which makes sense. The other thing, the mistakes people do is they put it in the freezer. Now, this doesn't really help because what it does is actually breaks freezes the trichomes and sort of breaks them off. And again, so you'll have a baggie with all this stuff stuck to the side, all the good stuff.
All the good stuff.
So a lot of people use freezers, and you shouldn't do that. Another thing is some people, when they're stashed, like they'll smoke a joint and put half of it back in their bag, the aroma from the charcoal the weed will pick up that flavor. So don't do that.
Made that mistake before.
Yeah, we've all done that.
Yeah.
Again, is manhandling it, and either putting it in a bag or just being rough with it, or when you break it up with your fingers, it's crumpled up. Grinder makes a big difference, and you're going to get more THC because when you're grinding you're smashing it with your fingers, you're just popping all the trichomes, and your fingers are getting a bunch of THC. But what you end up smoking or ingesting, whatever, isn't.
Right. It's not doing your fingers any good.
The other and the last one is big bright spaces. You don't want to keep it in a clear glass jar or a baggie in sunlight and heat. That's not good. You want to keep it in darkness and cooler. You're going to have, which just makes sense. It's going to help regulate the humidity and temperature, obviously, or go hand in hand. So that's what you want to do. So maybe either colored jars might be good, or glass jar with a label, or just keep the clear jar, out of the sun. Put it in a cabinet
somewhere
or
cool.
something.
Sounds like if you treat it like a bottle of wine, you're probably in good shape.
Or cigars.
Like
a humidor.
cigar, yeah.
Right. More and more people are understanding this, and I think people in the industry, now that it's booming and becoming acceptable to talk about this industry and go into the industry and go buying things from them. I mean, it used to be in a day when you walked into a head shop, you sort of like looked over each shoulder before you walked in,
Yeah.
It felt like you should wear a raincoat and glasses and a hat, hide your identity.
Definitely.
But that's not true anymore. Now people are going in and having no problem.
Yeah, now I see these ads like in High Times and stuff for these ultra cool humidors and all these accessories.
So with this article, I could see so many opportunities for people in the industry to expand either the products they make or their packaging, and the industry is seeing this. I know Verona brands here in Maryland now sell all of their cannabis in glass jars. Glass jar,
nice,
and it has a humidity pack in it. So the buds are perfectly cured, perfect humidity.
Man.
They
and
taste
they stay
great.
that way.
They burn great, as opposed to some
smart.
other companies that are just putting in these plastic things and with no him. And when you get them, they're dried out.
Is there a premium cost for that, Andrew? Like when you buy from there and get the glass?
Yeah, the glass is
a little bit more.
A little more. Some of them. Now Verona,
it's worth it though.
Verona brand is high end quality, so you're going to pay a little more for Verona, but you're going to get what you're going to get what you pay for.
So if you're spending $75 instead of $70,
big deal. Right.
That's probably
money well spent.
You know where that money went. Yeah.
It's going to be more like the difference between spending 60 and 75. It's not going to be so. It's going to be a little bit of difference, but
but once you have the glass container and you buy the dehumidifying packets or whatever they are, you can buy it in the plastic container, bring it home, and put it in your glass one.
Put it in your jar.
Well, that's what I do.
Yep.
So these are some of the things that I think people in the industry, are seeing, identifying, and profiting from.
So there's a lot of opportunities for
in just the
ancillary
storage,
businesses.
handling, and packaging.
Right, alone. This market's going to be insane in the next 5 years. Insane.
Well, folks, we want to hear your tips and experiences with regard to storing cannabis or any other topic that you have an idea on, check us out and give us your comments at VoteProPot.com.
Or send us an email at podcast@VoteProPot.com or call our message line at 240-257-2441.
And please like, follow, and share us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Just do a search for Vote Pro Pot.
Wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. But here I am in New York City, hiding out in Central Park, getting kidnapped by the police today sometime before dark. But I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. The judge looked down upon me, frowned. He said, "Kid, get on your way. Just don't start out your morning with espresso and a J." I said, "I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day." Hitched on out to Portland, caught a ride up to BC, took the bus over to the neighborhood to have a bowl with my coffee. Now I'm up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. Smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day.